Brutal Storm Alert is the title of this week's installment of Ezekiel Kralen's ongoing story about the two little dogs, Flacco and Lucky, and his crackhead friend who lives out in the street and yells at him every once in a while when he comes out to give some food or water or comfort or a sleeping bag to the dogs who are freezing in the rain. Ezekiel Kralen wrote, email correspondence from January 2nd to the 4th. Subject, there went my tent, too. Date, January 2. In the midst of Deke's bullshit, he requested my pop-up tent. This was right after I told him I called the fuzz. But you don't know how to set it up, I exclaimed. You'll just throw it away. Don't give me that, he retorted. I've set up all kinds of tents. I'm sure I can handle it. But you told me a few months ago you put up a tent and the police ordered you to take it down. It's too big. This is a big tent, too, I countered. I never said that. You're lying. He scowled. You love to make shit up just to have your way. Exactly what he does, Watson, but never admits to that. He's a table-turner par excellence. Rather than argue further, I dragged my tent down from the loft and brought it to him, placing it in the cart. After all, it's not like I'm going to get any more use from it. It was gathering dust, and maybe, just maybe, he'll actually figure it out and provide himself and the pups decent shelter for at least one night. That would be really nice. As would him showing up next time with a cozy warm nest in his cart just for the mutts and a waterproof cover over the whole shebang, instead of a monster-sized speaker hogging up all the room and forcing Flacco and Lucky to walk in the rain. Oh, interesting tidbit I forgot to mention. When the officer approached me after speaking with Deke and I began to describe my friendship with him and said I even help him. Take care of the pups, she interrupted. I said yes, but wondered how she knew that right off the bat. Good guess, perhaps. Or they already knew my story. Not that I believe some of the cops and others in the LGBT family literally read my Brindlekin Tales, but word may have gotten around over the months, or perhaps longer, maybe years and years longer, before I even met Deke, and this is just my latest mission. So once again, I surmise a scripted scenario by Bodhisattva Guardians in which Deke is playing his role as a pest, and the peacemakers theirs. Besides the superb officer giving me a clue by interrupting with such an insightful remark, Deke's own clue was to accuse me of exactly what he does all the time, making shit up. I just don't think this was accidental, but part of the Bodhisattva challenge to quell all negative emotions, and it didn't faze me one iota, since I know the game very well at this point in my evolution, and the challenge is also not to cave in to despair no matter how numerous the demonic visions tossed my way by the Cajun trickster. Thus I am neither worried nor grief-stricken over this latest fake crisis. But most importantly, in my stable centeredness, I did not express any anger or frustration and made it absolutely clear that I don't want to press charges. I felt very much like the star actor on stage who recited his lines with perfect execution. I'm a hero in my own play, not just my own mind, for the play is writ by others, mainly Arwen, I suspect. And that makes the policewoman who came to the rescue angel number 6 of the holiday season, or number 7, if I include that amazing appearance of a homeless black dude dressed like a cosmic Santa in quiet meditation, seated upon a shimmering carpet. Subject, we're about to be hit with a brutal storm. Date, January 3rd, morning. From Yahoo News, San Francisco is about to be hit with a brutal storm so severe that a meteorologist says is one of the most impactful he's ever seen. Deke had better be prepared instead of playing his drama game. The dogs need protection, and I can't provide that. We're about to be hit with a brutal storm. Date January 3rd, early afternoon. Watson wrote, so worrisome. Poor little angel babies. I replied, Deke knows plenty of homeless people who can advise him where to seek emergency shelter and should be busting his ass right now for the sake of the dogs. But he probably doesn't know a bad storm is coming up shortly. If he drops by this evening and refuses to leave to hustle up shelter, I'll have to contact some homeless organization to bring him to wherever he can ride out the storm. I'll suggest he leave the speaker with me so the pups can at least be protected in a covered shopping cart with a pile of clothing and a sleeping bag. I'm not counting on him to follow through on this, though. He's a fool for just sitting there in the rain yesterday, bellowing how he's shivering and wet and needs to go to the hospital. Most of the homeless found shelter. He has no excuse. We might have no electricity for a while, either. But I hope the Castro and my building do not suffer damage. Sewers will probably back up. Water system may not be potable. Looks like walloping rains soon due in your neck of the woods, too. Probably worse than here, though I'm not sure. But non-stop rain is forecast for your area till at least the 17th. Geez. Subject. Well, that was disheartening. Date, January 3rd, mid-afternoon. A short while ago, I went to Golden Produce on Church Street to pick up another loaf of my favorite raisin bread. Returning home, I stopped at the corner of Church and 14th, waiting for the light to turn green. I looked both ways to see if I could jaywalk, and saw to my immediate left, standing barely 3 feet away, with another pedestrian between us, Arwin. So I looked away, toward my right again, then my left for one more glance at him. He, of course, acted like I wasn't there, so I did the same. He crossed a few seconds later, but I decided to wait a bit to see which of the 2 intersecting streets he'd choose, Market or 14th. Once I saw he was going up Market, I finally crossed and walked up the other, my usual route anyway. He looks his age now, perhaps older, jowls forming on a face with lots of gray stubble, and his previously golden auburn hair frostier than ever. He sported a baggy brown jacket and slacks and a thick pair of gloves, which may be what he wears at work for unloading heavy boxes from delivery trucks to their shelves one level up. He walked with a pronounced stoop, reducing his real height to like 6 inches less. He's 12 years younger than me, so is 60 years old now, but I swear he looks 70, though as a trickster himself he may have created an illusory appearance of morbid aging just to fuck with me. For he's done stuff like that before, many times, appearing shabbily dressed, homely, and worn down one day, then his usual stunningly radiant self the next. San Francisco. If you're looking for a place bubbling over with pointless drama, you've found your home. Well, that was disheartening. Date January 3rd, late afternoon. Watson wrote, Holy Toledo! I replied, one way of putting it. Let's see if he begins to appear in my world again, more often. Meanwhile, Carlson was carried off to an ambulance once more about an hour ago. See photograph. That scooter in the bottom center, wearing a black cap and hoodie. I heard voices in the hallway from Carlson and the emergency crew and made out 2 words, hernia and diarrhea. Now moving along to around 40 minutes later, just before 5 p.m., when Sedge is supposed to show up to collect his $150, so I stepped outside to see if he'd appear. Deke didn't, even though he should have been there too. I only had to wait 2 minutes before the seller showed up, and I learned his real name is Heimdall. He said it's a Viking name. So we talked mostly about Deke, that he promised Heimdall some barter items in addition to the money I just gave him, which items have yet to manifest. Long story short, he realizes now Deke is a jackass and not a good person to make deals with. Not that he was angry in the least, even said it's his own fault. He admitted Deke is pretty much a nice dude, just don't do any wheeling and dealing with him. I informed him I had to call the cops on him yesterday because he was screaming and soaking wet in the rain and refused to leave, so maybe that's why he didn't show up. Or perhaps he didn't want you to accuse him in front of me, that he ripped you off, I added. At any rate, it was a most friendly conversation. He said that JBL cost him $400, and I informed him I looked it up on Amazon, and it usually sells new for $500. I later resented giving it to him for such a cheap price, he admitted, but he said he'll cherish it forever. Unlikely, I replied. He'll probably sell it off or damage it before long, maybe wind up getting it waterlogged. He's careless with his electronics. I described to him how sometimes he'll bring a smartphone or speaker he knows doesn't work, ask me to bring it upstairs and charge it, then a short while later I'll come back down and tell him it's dead or the charging port is shot. Then he'll accuse me of breaking it, and I now owe him a bunch of money. But I never fall for it. His little schemes never work with me. Don't see why by now he doesn't just drop the BS. He should know better at this point. We also talked about the doggies, how sweet they are, and my grave concern over their well-being because of Deke's poor treatment of them. He cares more about his gadgets than his dogs, I exclaimed. He'd rather place a big speaker in his cart, cover it up from the rain, and let the pups walk wet and chilly instead of keeping them warm and dry in that cart. Anyway, we chatted barely 10 minutes before he took off, but I was most impressed by his stable, calm demeanor. He also remembers when I adopted the doggies for almost 3 months 2 years ago to get them out of the rain and away from Deke's bipolar explosion. I was surprised he knew about that at all, but glad I got that moolah to him. Well, that was disheartening. January 4th morning, Watson wrote, hernia and diarrhea, 2 words that should stay as far away from each other as possible. I replied, unless they're a vaudeville act. Watson wrote, poor fucker, that's a sad picture. I replied, the sooner he's gone, the better. Every time Carlson is rushed to the hospital, I pray he never returns. Subject, a steady light rain over the night and into the day. January 4th morning. And still going on. Wind only about 8 miles per hour, so nowhere near as bad as predicted. Thank Canis. Hopefully that's the worst it will get until Friday when we're supposed to get a break, then more rain predicted over the next 10 days. However, I think they will be mild and sporadic. Though for tonight, AccuWeather says winds gusting past 45 miles an hour. Rain heavy at times, flooding, mudslides, debris flows, damaging winds. Deke has not shown up yet, and that's good because he needs to tend to the safety of those hounds. And there is no dry spot in my area. As for emergency homeless shelters that allow pets, they may turn anyone away with more than 1 dog. I imagine his cumbersome Bluetooth speaker will not survive the weather. Small sacrifice to pay for the Brindlekin's protection, as far as I'm concerned. I sincerely hope he managed to set up that tent properly, but I have my doubts. More thoughts on Heimdall, my new Viking friend. My original vision that triggered the concept I first called Neo-Christianity, then changed to Neo-Positivity, which eventually evolved into my Bodhisattva premise, was given to me by the Viking god Odin back in the year 2000, so I conjecture that Heimdall may be a type of visitation, an affirmation of my ongoing trial to keep the doggies safe against many odds. For his spirit was most pacific in spite of dealing with Deke's BS, as well as bursting with confidence about his own life, as indicated by his always impeccable attire and robust positive attitude. I conclude he is homeless too. As he mentioned, he's finally acquiring a studio apartment after a 2-year struggle to get there with the aid of a kind social worker, though it may take 2 or 3 more months to finally seal the deal. One would expect a person of Viking descent to be stereotypically tall, but Heimdall is only 5'6", an inch shorter than yours truly, though certainly has the platinum hair and light blue eyes common among Scandinavians. I looked up the meaning of his name and found out he's the son of Odin and 9 mothers, and keeps watch for invaders and the onset of Ragnarok from his dwelling. So fits in like a jigsaw piece with my vision of the warrior god Odin and my reaching out to a Vietnam veteran years earlier for whom Odin appeared in a dream to present me with a consoling and most revelatory vision. So earlier today I prepared and sent off my latest Brindlekin episode for Marshall to read this Friday night, which I called The SFPD Intervenes. I'm glad he's finally caught up to this scenario, which is almost a 3-month lag behind my current tales, since it marks the end of my dog tending, whether indoors or out, and the beginning of new struggles in which the storm gods play an unwelcome role. I just listened to Marshall's narration from last Friday for the 4th time, as it gives me an objective ear whereby I learn more about myself and my situation with Deke and pups than I could otherwise, and I always wonder, when I hear a tale read back, is the writing good enough to capture listeners' attention? I am so far satisfied that the answer is yes. I was amused over how he introduced that last piece by declaring, quote, and I have the latest installment of the dog sitting being abused and taken advantage of by a crackhead, stories by Ezekiel Kralin. For technically speaking, Deke is not a crackhead. He never touches the stuff, but is your quintessentially avid meth freak. Far be it for me, however, to pick a nit over this with Marshall, considering what a fine job he does of reading my tales, and that they are now out there floating around in the ether to glob only knows what other ears. The rain has subsided now for a time as I complete this, my latest missive to one Morticia Tara Roosevelt, my dear Watson. Subject, shit sandwich headed my way. Date, January 4, early afternoon. Wind gusts may reach 70 miles per hour. From Fox News, San Francisco braces for potentially life-threatening bomb cyclone that could bring flooding, winds, mudslides. A steady light rain over the night and into the day. January 4th, mid-afternoon. Watson wrote, howling winds here. A tree came down during the night, though I didn't hear it. Fell on the roof of the studio, shack where I write, but amazingly very little damage. I replied, thank Glob for that. Maybe you didn't hear it because it gradually leaned over gentle-like. No winds howling down south yet, though. Storms usually hit Mendoland first before barreling down the coast. Watson wrote, seems to be letting up a bit right now, but I'm braced and ready. Power flickered, but came back on. A bloody miracle. Dogs curled up tightly asleep in their beds, dreaming doggy dreams. I replied, glad to hear the pups are so complacently cozy, but the cats, I remember you said one of them freaks out over a storm. Watson wrote, doesn't seem far-fetched at all. I replied, steady at the Heimdall. May the gods of the far north protect Deke and his furry charges. Watson wrote, when they made the Vikings, back in 1957 or so, they built an exact replica of a Viking ship that had been preserved somewhere in Scandinavia. But they had to scale everything up, because Kirk Douglas, who was not overly tall, maybe 6 feet, and the rest of the actors couldn't fit into the diminutive spaces where the Vikings of old once did. We think of Vikings as tall, and they probably were for their time, but by today's standards they were shortish. I replied, you just popped my bubble with a troll doll replica of the mighty Thor. See picture. Watson wrote, thinking of that movie, talking about it with my long-ago Jewish boyfriend. He laughed and said he called it the Kikings because most of the cast was Jewish. I replied, oh, geez, funny. Maybe they were all gay, too, and held a lusty Viking party on opening night. Watson wrote, pithy, concise summary. I replied, Marshall nailed it once again. Watson wrote, crack, meth, they mess a person up similarly. I replied, you think? Though alcohol ranks right there on the top of the list of most dangerous substances. I'd rather deal with a meth head any old day than a booze hound, though I'd prefer not to have anything to do with either type if it weren't for my beloved Flacco and Lucky. Well, batten down the hatches, Watson. It's going to be a bumpy sail tonight, and know that should either or both of us lose electricity for a time, my thoughts are with you through this bound-to-be record-shattering squall.